It is June 6th, 5:30 p.m. I call this meeting to order.
July 6th.
July.
Sorry,
You're in the ballpark.
I'm just getting ahead of next year.
you're okay.
We have roll call.
Councilman Becker,
Here.
Councilman Jekyll,
Here.
President Johnson,
Here. Item number 3, review and possible recommendation to the city council relating zoning text amendments relating to the following items. Medium industrial land uses, home occupations, off-street parking, fencing, building maintenance, landscaping, signage, and pools. Mr. Drager.
Good afternoon. So I guess I'll just do a quick run through on these and touch on them, and then I'll open up for questions from you all after that. So starting from the beginning, number 1, single family residential zoning, it's just correcting a typo. SR was missing from that list. Number 2, this is allowing for parking under a first floor of a multi-unit residential building. It's not adjusting anything for small residential ordinances and stuff like that. Number 3, clarifying text removes a contradiction. So first floor residential is already allowed in urban mixed use, but that line that's stricken makes that a little confusing. So we're removing that potentially. Number 4, it's missing a section in land use categories that was omitted. I'm not sure why it was omitted, but figured it was a good idea to put it back in there for clarification, since light industrial and heavy industrial were in there. Excuse me. So it just made sense to have medium industrial in there for a clarification of what the requirements and allowances are. Yeah, continuing all down that next page is all that medium industrial, clarifying the same thing. Home occupancy accessory land uses. It's clarifying permitted home occupancy vehicles.
Home occupations, right, Jed?
What's that?
Home occupations.
Home occupation,
Yep.
excuse me, yes. It's just clarifying the number of vehicles that would be allowed. Right now, there is no limit on those number of vehicles, and this is putting that at 1, which is felt that would better align with what the actual requirements for a home occupation permit would be, given the questions later on in the ordinances pertaining directly to home occupations. Number 6, off-street parking and circulation. It's clarifying that the ordinances are requiring a solid surface, not gravel. This is stated several times throughout our ordinances. This is getting rid of that and or gravel, which is a little confusing since it's clarified in other places. Number 7, similar thing. It's clarifying the requirements. There was a few things that were a little confusing in there. Same thing with C down there. It's just requiring that if you do replace your apron, you're not required to replace it, but if you are, you have to bring it up to our ordinances. Number 8, limitations of uses of all off-street parking areas. This is once again clarifying what a home occupation equipment or vehicles and things like that, what would be allowed on a residential property. This section is basically stating that skid loaders and bobcats and heavy equipment are not typical for a home occupation permit. Section or number 9, this is the fencing standards. This is clarifying something that was already in there. So in our current ordinances, it states that coated chain link fencing is not allowed in the front and side yard. This is clarifying that the intent was chain link in general was not allowed in the front and side yard.
But it's still allowed in the backyards, correct?
Yes,
Okay.
yep, still allowed in backyards and side yard.
Okay.
Just not the street side. Number 6 would be a height change down below. It's still number 9, but listed 6 below there. This is an alteration to what was previously allowed, would only be 4 feet in the front yard and street yard of an industrial area. Not much of a security fence at 4 feet. So this would allow for going to a 6-foot fence but it would have to be more decorative rather than a straight up chain link fence or something like that.
And in just those specific zoning districts.
Just those specific, yes, which would be the industrial zoning districts and the
Are existing fencing maintainable, or do you have to come up to code?
Yeah, no, if it's pre-existing, you're allowed to keep it. There is no going back and forcing people to change their fencing. This is all just new installation fencing. So number 10, this is correcting a fence standard graphic. So the graphic that was included in our zoning ordinances did not align with the text that was already there. So the graphic is being changed to reflect what the text is already saying. Number 11, matching swimming pool requirements to the building code and building practices. Right now, our ordinances requires all new pools to have a 6-foot fence. That is outside of what the requirements are per building code and for normal practice. We're proposing to go to a 4-foot requirement, still maintaining the self-closing, self-latching gate that would be required. And then the thing changing there would be right now, if an existing fence is 42 inches higher or more, it would be allowed to stay. We're asking to move that up to 48 inches to maintain that, once again, that 48-inch standard for safety. Number 12, adding a missing provision. This section here was in our previous zoning ordinances and was omitted. Not sure exactly why. I think it was just kind of overlooked, but is a useful tool for houses that are not being properly maintained or structures that are falling down and things like that for a safety reason. Just simply asking to put that section back in to the current one.
Yeah, I kind of look at this and I'm curious as to item C where it kind of describes it.
Yes.
Looks vague to me. It's more like the eye of the beholder runs item C. It's not based on any set of this rule, that rule. It's more based on opinion of who's in charge at the moment.
Well, C is asking that the material they're using is naturally resistant, and that if it's something that is capable of rotting to deteriorating, that you're maintaining it with a product that would keep it from rotting.
I'm probably mostly pointed at the end of it where it says to maintain an attractive appearance. That's in the eye of the beholder.
I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there's discretion in the zoning code. I mean, there is.
I could see that, yeah. But from why I look at it, this is mostly just, it's for paint that's peeling and falling off of a house.
Dispute of opinions is handled how? About what's appropriate for the eye of the beholder to maintain an appropriate appearance.
Well, usually a situation like this, I would be based off of complaints first. Nobody's driving around looking for it. So somebody would bring that complaint in front, and then it's on site. Look at it would be determined whether it is being neglected or not.
There's an appeal process in the zoning ordinance. It's an appeal of an administrative decision by the zoning.
Yeah, zoning
administrator.
interpretation. So if somebody doesn't agree with my decision, they can appeal it.
Okay, I'm just curious as to how someone would address it if they disagreed with your decision or your opinion or the city's opinion
That would
of
start
their premise.
Yeah, that would start in my office with a disagreement with it. And then if we still, then we go through that appeal process.
Okay, can you describe that to me?
That would, well, that's in our zoning ordinances, the whole process, but they would do that. Because first they would have to have a letter from me stating that they need to fix it. Then they would have to dispute it. And then that would go through the appeal process, which is in our zoning ordinances in the back. But that answer to that, or that end result doesn't rely with me. That would go through planning commission to decide.
Thank you.
Welcome. Number 13, I believe I'm at. Yeah, it's just a typo. So nothing changes in there, just flip-flopping 2 words that were meant to be in the other location. Number 14, simplifying confusing language. So expansion. Oh, yeah. So this is just clarifying that any new areas would fall under the landscaping requirements rather than the confusing 50%, this, that. So anything you are improving would fall under the current ordinances. If you're not disturbing, not changing it, then you do not have to improve it. Number 15, it is just clarifying by adding it back, so you're not reading 3 words rather than you're just going to standard, and then it's in the footnotes where all the other standards and other requirements that go along with signs are located at. So it's a singular location. Number 16, this is adding an allowance for a second or more order board sign. Right now, we only allow for 1. We've actually had a request for a second and we don't allow for it, and they're trying to ease backing up traffic and things like that. But as our ordinances stand right now, we don't allow for that. So this is to make an allowance. It's also increasing the sign area and height to better accommodate more modern order board signs, which are mostly all digital at this point. But it does put a maximum square footage. So if you wanted to keep expanding on your number of signs, you would be limited on that. So you can't just keep going on and on with multiple signs.
That's pretty much directed at drive-through ordering or.
Yes, order board signs, yep. So that's drive-through lanes. Right now, we would only allow for 1. Or you could possibly have 2, but you would only have 1 order board sign.
Joe, when that says sign, is that literally just 1 sign, or could it be multiple panels as long as they are underneath that total?
Those
square
add-on
footage?
panels are technically supposed to be a part of that, or that same square footage.
Okay. So that would be allowed.
Yeah, it's on 1 stand, yeah. So if you wanted to put add-ons, they would have to still be inside that square footage
Understood.
allowance.
Okay.
That kind of brings me to mind of what, like, I go through McDonald's, they have probably 3 signs already where one's just like advertising and then you get to the order board.
Yep.
Is that still in code doing it that way, or is it going to change?
That would still be in code with the change. Without measuring it, I'm not for sure what they have there, but if they have expanded parts and they are outside of the current allowance, that would be outside of our ordinances, but that's a pre-existing one as well. So there's no going back and forcing them to go. That would be based off our prior ordinances. Number 17, these here, this is actually just putting this into perspective, or actually making the procedure more aligned with what we're already doing. Right now, most of these things come before Plan Commission rather than being determined by myself and the city engineer. So we're just putting this in the ordinances that we would like that to continue, and that it's more appropriate for the Plan Commission to make some of these decisions. The only one that would be changed in this section here would be for swimming pools. Right now, swimming pools have to go to Plan Commission for anything that's 1 foot or more of excavation. This would put it to the city engineer and zoning administrator for those. They're a pretty simple process, and it's easily handled inside of the staff. There's very clear requirements for those.
Just like a standard building permit.
Yep,
when you come
yep,
through.
yeah, the ordinances are very clear on what's allowed and what's not for those, and for screening requirements and all that stuff, so.
It creates some efficiencies as to not having to wait for a plan commission meeting for the plan commission to approve the swimming pool. If it meets the standards of the code, then the staff can issue it.
Everyone always waits till May to start their pools, right? Everyone always waits till May to put their pools in,
Yeah,
right?
and then it's a mad dash to get it done. Exterior building design standards, site plan approval. Sorry, that was part of the same one. So then number 18 is correcting a typo where we had village instead of city. And then moving on, 19, that is just this is a figure that represents the number 17, basically showing the same thing, just in the figure that what are the proper approval procedure and who is the approving body. And number 20, plan review and approval procedure. This is something that, once again, we already practice, which is all these things need to go in front of Plan Commission for site plan approval. But the degree of change be elevated by the zoning minister and city engineer. That's pretty much it leaves a discretion to the city engineer and zoning administrator. 2 different people decided the level of change that would trigger it to have to go back to Plan Commission, rather than a small element having to go back through another Plan Commission meeting. But anything of a sizable change would still be required to go back to plan commission. And it would have to be in writing that we're saying that it does have to go to plan commission. And that's it on my list. So I'm welcoming more questions about specific ones.
Yeah, I want to go back in time towards the beginning where you're talking about like maybe now the bobcats and
Okay.
skid steers weren't going to be allowed.
So the part, yeah,
Which-
individual specific,
I'm not terribly concerned about that, but what I read suggested that you're going to be limited to one truck or one trailer or one something.
okay, yeah, those are
And-
two different sections, but relating to the same home occupation permit, yes.
So can you clarify for me how many vehicles you can park in your own driveway?
So it's not limiting the number of physical vehicles, your personal vehicle and those items do not count in that one. This is a vehicle that is specific to the home occupation permit. So your personal vehicle, your personal car, all those things have nothing to do with it. This is for that home occupation permit, the allowed occupation that's taking place in the home. Then you would be allowed one job trailer, one construction van or whatever per home occupation. The reasoning behind that is it's when you go through the home occupation requirements and specifications in there, there's a few key things that kick in there. Where home occupation is meant to be an economic activity performed within the residential unit. And there's no outside display of materials, goods, or equipment that should be visible in that. Those are all things that are lined out in here. No mechanical equipment or machinery shall be used that's not normally associated with a residential home. Now, there's just a very long list of specific things in the home occupation permit for requirements and things that are not allowed that the one vehicle per is more aligned with and associates with it more properly.
So how does this affect, like me, I drive truck for a living.
Mhm.
Some nights I get told to take the truck home. Or middle of the night, I have a water main call. Does that affect someone like me
No,
or
if
someone
you're-
who does drive for another company?
No, this is something if you're operating that business out of your home.
Okay.
So if your office is there, you're keeping that vehicle there on a regular basis.
Okay.
It's your normal thing to store it there.
Okay.
That's what this is pertaining to. Somebody that is bringing their work vehicle home on an occasional thing, that's not what the home occupation permit is meant to go or meant to be restricting or guiding.
Okay, that was my biggest concern. I had a few people reach out about was the parking of a vehicle.
Mhm.
You know, they drive dump truck all summer. They bring it home usually Monday through Friday. On the weekend, it goes back to the shop. Would that classify into there or?
That to me is not something that I'd be asking for a home occupation permit if
Okay.
it's only there for a couple days and not there on a regular basis.
I thought I specifically saw dump trucks as can't be done on the list of.
It's not to be kept on a residential property,
As part of a home
As-
occupation.
part of the home occupation permit. So if your home occupation, so if you are driving a dump truck on a day-to-day basis and every day you store your dump truck at home, that would be where that would come into play. Or your only place that you're storing that vehicle.
But also recall that the zoning code covers private property. It doesn't cover the public right of way.
Correct.
So this
So-
would be, and this is specific to home occupations. So if you don't have a home occupation, you're not subject to the home occupation ordinance.
Okay,
But I mean, there are standards for vehicles being parked on residential property.
Right.
Okay, I guess I could just need a refresher course to enlighten me the definition of a home occupation. If I work from home per se, I have a business. Whatever it might be, but I don't do any work at home. I don't have a storefront at home. I don't have a sign at home.
Right. If you're not doing any business out of your home, then you're not operating a
I'd be answering the phone, taking orders maybe.
This is meant to work on somebody whose sole business is at home. But I will not deny that there are occasions where you could have two different offices. And if you're keeping multiple pieces of equipment at your home, that's going to be a home occupation as well. Even if you have two locations, but if you're always bringing your work equipment home and it's being kept there, or if you're maintaining that equipment there, that's operating a business out of your home.
Okay, would the definition for, let's just say my home occupation is whatever, I drive a 1-ton truck, but it's what I drive every day to work, to the grocery store, to something else. It's my personal transportation along with. Can I also have a trailer in the driveway, or am I going to be stopped from that?
If it's I don't know that, I think that would be a case by case situation there. If it's a heavy vehicle, 1-ton vehicle, and you're regularly have heavy materials along with it, and you have a trailer out there, then I would say you're probably operating out of your home. But like I said, this is a case by case situation there.
So I guess maybe I'll provide some clarification here. Under the current ordinance, a home occupation is defined as economic activities performed within a residential dwelling unit. Examples include personal and professional services, handicrafts, and retail conducted online. Home occupations are intended to provide a means to accommodate a small home-based business or professional service without the necessity of rezoning from residential to business district. Home occupations are limited to low-intensity businesses and businesses with limited overlap of customer visits. And then there's a whole list of regulations. And one of those regulations is that no vehicle larger than 1-ton capacity truck or van that is used in conjunction with a home occupation shall be stored on premise or parked on adjacent residential streets. This prohibition shall also include specialized mobile equipment. Trailers will be allowed to park on residential street, provided that a home occupation permit is approved, the trailer is registered and fee paid, and the trailer is safely parked adjacent to the permitted property. So that is what's existing right now. That is an existing in our
So,
code.
just to have my answer prepared for certain individuals I know who will ask me.
Sure.
They race, they have an enclosed trailer. They
There-
view their racing as an occupation because they use whatever tax incentives are available when they claim the money on their taxes if they win a race.
Mhm.
Are their trailers going to be allowed on the trail on the side of the road or not?
Off-street parking regulations, as far as in the street, that's not regulated by this because they wouldn't have the permit to begin with. As far as whether it's a business or not, that would once again be a case by case. Is that something they're operating solely out of their home? I don't know, but there is also provision in our off-street parking regulations that they can park their hobby vehicles or trailers on their residential property without it requiring a home occupation permit.
Thank you.
And I'll just further clarify, the existing code right now says the home occupation shall not involve manufacturing, processing, the sale or repair of large appliances, vehicles or motors, commodity or equipment rental, care, grooming, breeding, or keeping of animals, or construction of equipment and machinery. Restaurants, taverns, clubs, amusement or entertainment establishes or uses that dispatch persons other than the occupant of the residence or equipment from the premises are not permitted home occupations.
Not to go too far, much further into the weeds on this, but now that we're talking about trailers, I thought there were limits on the length of a trailer that can be parked on a city street. Is that correct or not?
That's not in my zoning. We're mostly, this zoning is on your private property.
Right, I understand that wouldn't be.
Yep.
a
So when it
zoning.
comes to personal trailers and things that are not covered by a home occupation, that would be more of a municipal thing.
Yeah.
And not covered in this. But there are provisions in the off-street parking where you can park your hobby trailers and things that on your property without a permit.
What about
So-
on the street?
So under our current section 94-432 sub D, trailer parking. The purpose of this subsection is to prevent the use of city streets, avenues, alleys, or public parking lots for storage of trailers. It shall be unlawful for the owner or operator of a trailer to cause or permit such trailer to be parked on any street, avenue, alley, or public parking lot within the city, except construction company trailers that are parked on the street adjacent to the site that is currently being worked on, and boat trailers in the municipal lots on the west side of Mechanic Street. Trailers shall be permitted to temporarily park on the street to load, unload for emergency repairs if the police department is contacted prior to parking the trailer. The trailer must be parked adjacent to the property owned by the person making that request. And then there is a section on utility and business trailers shall be allowed to park on residential streets, provided that the owner, the business owner or trailer user obtains a home occupation permit for that business. The business trailer is registered with the police department. The business trailer can only be parked on the street adjacent to the residence having the home occupation permit, and then the business trailer will be governed by the 24-hour parking requirement, or excuse me, 48-hour parking requirement, which is everybody in the city is subject to that. 48, every parked car in the city is subject to that.
Yeah, that matches what my understanding had been. Thank you.
And then semi-trailer parking is prohibited on all streets as well.
Okay, I still have a question in my mind of, I know in the world I walk in automotive repairs and
Mhm.
stuff, I know a lot of automotive racers. And you say that wouldn't constitute a home occupation? If they do it from their home, they've got a trailer and they keep their race car.
Like, as I said, there's a provision for a hobby, so to be kept on their personal property, as far as in the street.
And that would
yeah.
require it was paved driveway that they kept it on.
If it's a new section that they're adding, yes. If it's pre-existing, we're not going back and making them pave things that are already existing. But new parking areas do require to be paved.
I'm just thinking that they might take the alternative of putting the trailer with their race car in it in the driveway would work. But they might have it off to the side and on the grass. That won't work, correct?
You cannot park in the grass, no.
Okay, it's just a question I know. It's
No, I
coming my
understood,
way.
yeah. Yep, any new parking area, there are provisions in there for adding parking alongside the garage and things like that, but it is required to be paved. You can park those things in the back of the house, but it has to be screened as well for your neighbors, because it's not for the job of those zoning ordinances to protect the whole city, not individuals. It's to protect the other neighbors as well from like unsightly things. Not saying that any individual is unsightly, just stating that not everybody wants to see a trailer in the backyard next door to their house. So that's why we have screening requirements.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any other discussion?
I will just add that the Plan Commission did review these zoning text amendments at their meeting at the end of June. I'm not sure the exact date. They did recommend the council that they move forward to council with a positive recommendation. The first reading is on the agenda for the council meeting tonight. There would potentially, if the council at the meeting tonight does move them forward, there would potentially be 2 additional readings of this at city council meetings. So 3 total readings of these ordinances at city council.
Moving on, item 4, review and possible recommendation to
Is
the.
there, does this committee have a recommendation to the city council relating to that item?
I will move to recommend to the
Sorry.
city council, the zoning text amendments, relating to the items as listed.
Second, yeah, I seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. Item number 4, review and possible recommendation to city council relating the ordinance to amend sections 58-197 and 58-202 of the city of Fort Atkinson Municipal Code relating curfew for juveniles and penalties. Chief Bump, please.
So I submitted a draft to this committee covering our ordinance for juvenile for violations of curfew by juveniles. There's a number of reasons why it needed to be updated. It's a very old ordinance and it was functional back in the day when it was drafted. But as the world has changed, we haven't kept up with that ordinance. The ordinance is written more as a procedure instead of an actual ordinance or law. So my drafts reflect some of the things that we need to update within that ordinance. I covered a lot of it really well in the letter that I provided and the reasoning why we want to make the updates. But mainly, one of the biggest concerns that we have is that we want to have officer discretion as a priority in a lot of our ordinances. If you look at the first section of that ordinance, it says that an officer shall give a warning to a juvenile who is caught out after curfew on their first offense. That means that there is no option to issue a citation. You have to give a warning. And in my experience in law enforcement, there are times when a citation is necessary, even if it's the first violation. On the other hand, if you look at the second part of that ordinance, it talks about how on a second offense, the officer shall issue a citation. And when you see the word shall, that doesn't mean you can or you may, it means you must. So now we also are taking away officer discretion in that situation as well. So what we're saying is the first time the person is caught, they have to get a citation or they have to get a warning. And the second time they're caught, they must or have to get a citation. And so I think we need to clean up that language. So we use officer discretion in decision making. Our goal in law enforcement is to address behavior, change behavior, and do what works at the appropriate level every time. And if we have an ordinance that's so restrictive that tells the officer that they have to do this and they have to write a ticket or they cannot write a ticket for the violation, I don't think we're kind of we're not meeting what we're trying to do in our community, and that is to educate and help mentor youth even when they're getting in trouble, right? So that's my biggest concern in the ordinance, and that's what motivated me to do the updates that we've done within. I only want to update the sections I submitted, so no other part of the ordinance do I want to address except for the ones drafted. And I'm open to any questions that you might have beyond what I've kind of laid out there right now.
I'd be most interested in, I discussed this at an earlier date with Rebecca, that there's some exemptions to what qualifies as a violation.
Yep.
As per se, you were babysitting and you had your mom's authority and you were babysitting at the neighbor's house, a couple of houses where you're allowed to walk home from there.
All of those protections are within case law and are backed by law. So we want to maintain those as well, because if we do an ordinance that doesn't align with guidelines and case law, then we are issuing an ordinance that's not valid. So none of that would be addressed. You have coming to and from a school function, coming to and from work. You have coming to and from a political event. So there's all these different protections, and none of that will change because we want our ordinance to be legal and valid.
That would be my only concern. I like the rest of what you wrote.
Good, thank you.
Chief, one question, more just curious, in the discussion in the memo, it talks about how there had previously been a distinction between minors 13 years and under versus 14 to 17, and these changes would remove that delineation. Is that because of under the law they're all considered minors, or is there other reasoning?
It simplifies the enforcement, but it also simplifies the ability to follow and comply. So we want it to be more plain and direct for the officers to apply the law, but we also want parents and children to understand it and not have all these different categories of ages and different violations and different hours. We want to be consistent. Our best tool in compliance with juveniles is through the parents, right? And we want the parents to have good, accurate information, and we want it to be easy for them to understand and remember. And I think, I mean, those are kind of the more important reasons.
Makes sense.
Just a ballpark idea, how many incidents do you run into throughout a year with curfew problems?
A lot. It is a fairly big issue. We have last night they had 2 different calls for service with multiple juveniles out where they had to deal with that situation. So it is, not every single night, but every
It's
week
not a
we're
once
dealing with
every
it
couple
weekly.
months
No,
issue.
definitely not.
Well, I think there'd be an advantage to making it all one group. based on that. It's pretty hard to tell the difference between a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old.
Yep.
And they're
and-
not going to carry identification papers with them.
Yep, exactly. This ordinance aligns with a lot of other communities, so I'm not like coming up with something new and extreme here. We're aligning with kind of best practices too.
Um. I'm happy with the changes. I think this makes sense, and I do agree with your general philosophy of giving officer discretion to these situations. I think, there's a big difference between a couple kids were out playing across from mom and dad's house and it happens to be after curfew versus they're loitering at a private business or something. So I think there should be opportunities for discretion on that. So I will move to recommend to the full city council the ordinance amendments relating to the Fort Atkinson Municipal Code as presented.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you.
Moving on to item number 5, discussion relating to hours of operation for the municipal building. Ms. Ebert.
Thank you. This agenda item is just being presented for discussion of the ordinance committee on kind of some open communication. Section 2-1 in our code of ordinances outlines the hours for the municipal building. It was established back in January 4th of 1994, saying that the business hours for the building shall be from 8 to 5, basically winter hours, except during summer hours, beginning the first Monday in June and ending the Friday before Labor Day. And that's allowable from 8 to 4:30. Staff had researched trying to find where this came about to establish it as an ordinance to take effect back in 1994. We can't confirm if those hours were established prior to 1994. The Clerk Treasurer Finance Department and Park and Recreation Department were able to follow these hours throughout the winter and summer because we have several staff members. So we're able to be flexible. So there's always office coverage. Other departments, engineering, building inspector, city manager, they're singular in nature. So if one of them were to be absent, there's not a lot of coverage there. Also notable during the winter hours, if you will, there's an allotment for staff to take an hour lunch, which a lot find that's almost too long. During the summer hours, we allow some flexibility. So if the staff wants to work 8 to 4:30, that's a 30-minute lunch, but a lot of them have found it beneficial to come in at 7:45 and work 7:45 to 4:30. So that allows 15 minutes to kind of get everything set up for the day. And then they can take a 45-minute lunch. And again, that kind of varies on the day. I, for one, will say it's very hard to get my kids out the door to get to work at 7:45 some mornings. And during school time, it's even harder. Other departments have been able to kind of fluctuate their hours. A lot of it kind of depends on their work shift and their duties. For example, Public Works has started this summer altering their work hours, and it's been really beneficial for them where they have longer days, Monday through Thursday, and a little bit shorter on days on Friday. That allows them to work throughout, an entire project. If they can't accomplish it within half a day or a schedule that was shorter prior, it allows them more flexibility so they can accomplish more in a day. And we've seen a good response, I would say, from employees. I think some were hesitant, but some really grown to enjoy it. The water department technicians, they've also been able to fluctuate. So right now we're working on changing out a lot of water meters. Some people like earlier and later appointments. So we do have 2 staff members that are working longer days, while others are still maintaining the regular kind of 7 to 3:30 shift. So there is adequate coverage. It's kind of nice to have that the extra staff in the morning should there be an emergency that happens earlier in the morning, or maybe something comes up later at night. We've also noted that since COVID, we've seen a lot of less foot traffic, but additionally with all the credit cards that we take for different payments, we just started taking credit cards for building permits, and the foot traffic for the building inspector has decreased a lot. The different options we have, there's probably 7 different credit card companies we work with between court citations, park and recreation, utility bills, and there was one more. court utility bills. I'm missing one.
Building permits.
Building permits, yep, that was the other new one. So we're happy to say, since we started using express bill pay for utility payments, we have almost 1,600 residents that have signed up to use express bill pay, which is fantastic because it's no cost to the residents. They get an email when they get their utility bill. They can go online, they can pay right away. And there's no cost to them. So it's a very different dynamic. Having a lot less residents come in, that there's some days that our computer often goes to sleep in the front counter and we don't see that often. So again, this is kind of open discussion to see how the ordinance committee feels about this, if it's something to consider. Having it as an ordinance, allows through readings to change the times, but it could simply be a policy that's set by council or allow the city manager to make a policy for the building hours.
I guess that was gonna be one of my questions and my takeaways. I guess I'm not certain that hours of operation need to be an ordinance. I think that would be generally within the purview of the city manager and city staff to set those hours. So I would almost be willing to see us move away from that. And that would, in my mind, grant greater latitude if things come up, say there was an emergency situation or something and you had to alter the hours, on a temporary basis. I think that would give a little more latitude in those situations as well.
Even during tax time, you always see more people coming in to pay their taxes. That would allow you to open your hours up at the end of the year
Sure
a
could.
little bit more if needed.
There are also certain times, for example, when it's prior to an election, absentee voting is to be allowed until 5 p.m. the Friday before. So for example, in August of even years, 2024, 2026, when we're on our summer hours till 4:30, we would stay till 5 o'clock as required for that absentee voting purpose. We've never not been open to extending an hour or extending hours for certain circumstances. But again, now with the advances with technology and even email and phone, and everyone has smartphones nowadays. If it's dropping off a payment or something, a lot of them are doing it online.
Are there any payments that are not available online?
Dog licenses, which is just throughout a certain time of year. And then operator licenses. Those are all bartenders.
Property
That's
taxes.
and property, but there you can pay property taxes online. It's not the most advantageous, but it is an option. But also with operator licenses, they do have to fill out the application. And when it comes to pet licensing, they have to show us proof of rabies. So that is more in-person activities that would have to be done.
So there would be a minimal amount of people that showed up at 4:35 and said, but now I can't pay my bills.
Right. And we've always been really flexible with people. I mean, even when you have the water bill due date, we're not putting the penalties on at 8 o'clock in the morning. We wait for the mail, we wait for staff to get caught up on the payments. And sometimes it's even a day after because, we're not out to punish.
It seems no matter what you set for hours, people always wait till the last 5 minutes to show up.
It's
But
okay. I think we've all done that sometimes. And again, this was just kind of for discussion to see how the
Sounds real
committee
reasonable
had
to
felt
me.
for it.
Having said all that, I am generally in favor of just setting the same year-round hours that that staff had recommended. I think 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. generally works fine, I think.
Mhm.
You can make appointments if you need something else wise.
Another certain community I'm familiar with has those exact same hours and it seems to work very well.
Mhm.
And I haven't heard of any complaints from people on that.
Okay, well, I think what we will do then is we will probably draft something that just eliminates that section from the code. And then that would come to the full council for review.
I
Thank you.
I guess I don't have to look for a motion on this item, so I'll move on to item number 6, discussion relating to ATV, UTV use of the city of Port Atkinson. Ms. Allison.
Yes, so we have gotten requests from some of the people in the room even to take a look at ATVs and UTVs on city streets in Port Atkinson. As outlined in the memo and some of the attachments, staff is opposed to this idea. However, it's on the agenda for discussion. It's been requested by council members as well as public to discuss. So we also have Mr. Roberts from the DNR here as well to offer his take on it, as well as Chief Bump, just to provide some information, answer questions. And then we would be looking for discussion amongst the ordinance committee and then direction as to how to move forward. If the not final, but if the will of the ordinance committee is to direct staff to draft an ordinance, then we just like some direction and additional information from the committee in order to draft such an ordinance. And then that ordinance would come back as the previous ordinance for review by the full council with 3 readings. So I'm here to answer any questions that you have on the memo or the materials that were in the packet. Chief Bump, do you have anything you'd like to add before we, Mr. Roberts, adds anything?
I wouldn't mind if you went first and here from
Sure.
town.
Yes.
Now we got questions. I think if we could let him go first. Sure. We appreciate you coming.
Yep.
Yeah, I just
Thank
actually was doing some training with some deputies in Waukesha on ATV and UTV. So I have a bunch of I don't know, training pamphlets that were left over if you'd like any. This is I guess this captures a lot of what like the officers are gonna have to deal with on the road as far as enforcement side. We may give you one for chief. But if you didn't move ahead with it, you have to put on training for your officers. You know, and enforcement in this kind of this world. So I don't really have a dog in this fight. The legislature is pretty much clear about entrusting the local communities and municipalities to make the decision as to whether or not they feel it's appropriate to open their roads to ATVs and UTVs. It is a growing trend. You guys, of course, the county here has opened up their county roads. The only real county in this region of the state that's kind of been the firewall is Waukesha. They're still holding back, but Walworth County is opening them. You know, Jefferson County here opened them. Dodge County has opened them. So we went from about 50,000 miles of road routes open about 5 years ago to about 80,000 miles now of roads. So it almost doubled in less than 5 years. So you can see the trend that's occurring. People in municipalities are opening roads everywhere. What that's going to mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see as far as accidents, complaints, that kind of stuff. Traditionally and typically ATV road routes have been open in the western part of the state, the northern part of the state, and just recently it started cropping up down here. So this part of the state's kind of the canary in the coal mine as to whether or not we're going to see a jump in statistics with accidents and fatalities because of the urban nature of this part of the state. You know, it's very different in Iron County that we operate on the road than it is in downtown, the city of Whitewater, for example. They just opened their city. They have college kids now riding ATVs to school. So I guess it's a wait and kind of see. But I'm happy to answer questions about, I have some, actually, if you look online, there's a whole bunch of data we have about fatal incidents, crashes. We had, I think we're up to 14 fatal incidents this year with ATVs and UTVs. So we're about half the year through. Last year, I think we had 22, maybe 21, 22. The year before, right after COVID, it was pretty high, like 48 fatalities we had. Some of that's just new people on machines, just bought them, they had nowhere to go. So we saw a big spike in both crashes and fatal incidents. A lot of them are on roadways. Once again, I'm not here to advocate either way. It's your decision as a community. ATVs inherently are designed for off-road use. That's how they're engineered. That's what their tires look like. They're low pressure tires. They don't handle quick turns very well, especially on paved surfaces. They're built for the mud, the dirt, the gravel, the off-road conditions. On pavement, when you make a turn too quickly, those wheels bend over. You're talking tires that are like 4 to 6 to 8 pounds of pressure only. They tend to bend over. They fold over on themselves. You hit the rim on the pavement and they trip pretty easily, tipping to the sides. So, yeah, well, but there's a different dynamic too that's going on. You know, the people that ride trails really aggressively, I haven't necessarily seen that on the roadways. I've seen more older folks, you know, with very expensive units, treating them just like motor vehicles, basically. So it's really difficult to say how things are going to pan out, but once again, it's really your decision as a community. They're required to be registered. Communities can create more restrictive ordinances, not less restrictive. So most communities have put hours on their operation, nothing after 10 o'clock, things like that to keep people away from the bars. But the problem we have is we have a body of law. What's chapter 23? This is the law that governs ATV and UTV use in the state. It's very antiquated. It's built around being used off-road. And now they're on the roadways. So you got lapses in seriousness. If you think our body of law is not serious when it comes to OWI with motor vehicles, take a look at what it is with the ATV world. It's even less so. It's basically a ticket you get and send on your way. You can't revoke driver's licenses. You can't suspend all the things that you can do with a motor vehicle. Doesn't work. You can't charge an ATV rider on the road with an OWI under 346, which is the traffic code. You have to do it under chapter 23. So basically they pay a ticket. And there's implied consent. They have to submit to a blood test or an oximeter screening, but in the end, it's just a ticket and they're sent on their way. Also, those OWIs do not talk to one another. So a road OWI third offense, and he gets one on the road with his UTV, it's not a fourth offense. It's a first offense ATV OWI, which doesn't talk to one another. So maybe down the road, there'll be a patch from the legislative, community. At least to be pragmatic, maybe they'll address road use and separate it from off-road use. Like ice and trail use is different than operating on the roadway. But as of right now, it's all treated the same. So,
Well, that's kind of new to me. I was always under the impression as long as it's a motorized vehicle, you're intoxicated, it qualified.
yeah, and that's, even deputies and officers, as I'm doing this training, they were amazed to hear that, because we've all heard the story of the guy on the lawnmower that gets the OWI for driving on the roadway. But state statute's very clear as far as when you can apply 346, which is the traffic code, to ATVs and UTVs. And there's some things like fleeing you can address through traffic code, just like you could with a motor vehicle, not stopping for a stop sign, not stopping for a school bus, following too close, things like that. But otherwise, the OWI, the big one, is a big glaring miss. Partly because a driver's license is not a requirement to drive an ATV. It's not one of those requirements. It's all you need is a DNR safety certification if you're born after 88, 1 of 88.
So in the brochure that we got, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's 4 vehicles that says does not include. I'm curious as what definitively takes the red UTV out of the picture.
Was that the one that's in the upper right of that square? Yep. Yeah, that one, it has to do with the stance on the machine. So that was a good example of 2 machines that are probably off the line, out of the crate, legal UTVs and ATVs. But what the person has done after market is what made them no longer a UTV. So what they did there is a machine cannot be more than 65 inches wide. So a lot of these guys that take their machines out west, the Dakotas, things like that, to drive in the dunes and on the mountains and rock hop and rock climb, they widen the stance of their machine. They put different A-arms on the side just to they're a little more stable like that. But it's very clear in statute, once it becomes more than 65, it is no longer a UTV, and none of those laws would apply. So they can't be driven on your
That makes
roads.
sense with what I'm looking at. I can see the extensions.
Yep. And the other one I think I saw was they threw on tracks, the track system on and what defines an ATV is 3 or more tires, not tracks. So once you make those switches, it becomes a motor vehicle. That one you could, if it was driven on the road, you could address with traffic code, because only ATVs and UTVs are specifically exempt.
In these you'd be familiar with a lot of the cities and a lot of the rules that the cities have that have allowed this.
Mhm.
They're gonna have an ATV route that would go through the city. Access to that ATV route is based on what? Can I drive out of my driveway and drive direct to the route and be legal? Or do I have to trailer my ATV to a parking lot and then unload it and get right, a little parking area where I access it?
Yeah, you would have to trailer. I mean, that's how it's always been, even up in western Wisconsin. It's odd, like there'll be a guy with a house here and the trail is 100 yards down the road and they'd call and ask us, can I just drive to the trailhead? No, you can't. You have to trailer. I know it's silly. But that would be a reason maybe to create an ordinance that allows maybe a direct route from your home or residence to the route. Something to that effect.
Similar to a lot of the cities where all streets are routes,
Yeah.
unless.
Yeah, unless it's cheaper and easier to make, once again, I'm not advocating either way, but it is cheaper to post your city all open because you only have to post those ingress and egress routes. So any road that comes in, you got to put the sign up versus a hodgepodge of this road's open, this one's not, this one's not. And then as a law enforcement officer, I mean, it's challenging enough for me. I mean, you guys get comfortable and familiar with your town or your city. But for us as state officers, I work in Walworth County, and if they have registration and they're operating on the road, I don't know if they passed anything. If they're being legal, half the time I don't even address it because it's so confusing.
I was curious if I can ask a question. I don't own one, I'm not familiar with them, but I would assume not commonly driven in winter time, but how do they handle on the road? So maybe it's kind of a mild slushy day or it's ice is thawing. How do they handle as far as like the ice, the salt, the sand, the different traction?
Well, I mean, it'd be just as challenging as a motor vehicle on the ice. I don't think it would be any better. It might be a tiny bit better with the softer tires and wider tires. They're more geared toward that kind of environment than your Michelin street tires. But on bare conditions, that's where you really see the disparity. People are actually putting road tires on their ATVs because they've just been driving them on the roads, and that's way safer than the low pressure all-terrain type tires.
A
What
lot
about-
cheaper.
What about
Yeah.
after like a recent rainfall, that the streets are still wet? Does that make it more slick?
Still a challenge, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it'd still be dangerous. They're not, like I said, they're just not built for any paved surface unless you put the tires on them. And even that, the engineering and the intent of them is for an off-road machine. It's not really. I don't personally understand 25 grand. I'd rather buy a Jeep to ride on the road, but I get it. People like their toys, right? And it is fun to ride an ATV. So the other little nuance, though, I will tell you, because some communities have done it. We don't have a review authority of these ordinances that you pass, but whoever your retained counsel is would presumably review state statute or talk to us about drafting the ordinance. If you do open your road route, you have to open them to ATVs and then by extension UTVs, but you have the ability to restrict UTVs. So you can just open the ATVs. However, you cannot do the opposite. You cannot just open it to UTVs and not ATVs, just because there is no statute that allows for a UTV route. It's only an ATV route. And if it's an ATV route, by nature, it allows UTVs unless explicitly stated in the ordinance, you can't have them. So people are trying to keep ATVs off and just allow UTVs. That's not permitted by state law. So just in case that was a consideration.
Defining age brackets. Can the city do an ordinance where you have to be 18? Or are they stuck with that? You still have, if you're a legal driver of 16.
Most have 16, or I'm sorry, they have a driver's license requirement, which by nature just usually is a 16. So they just require a driver's license. I will tell you, if you read state statute again about your authority as a local community, it says you're supposed to adopt in strict conformity with the chapter. And strict conformity doesn't say you can keep a 12-year-old off the road. State law says you can, as long as they're supervised. But I'll tell you, communities have been doing it. They've been overstepping that, I guess, that authority. But it's in the interest of public safety, so nobody's challenging it. Nobody's really disputing it. But If you've got,
Seems kind of like a common sense, because most then at 16 have gone through a driver's training program.
Yeah.
So they at least know the rule of the street.
Yep.
Vaguely.
so that's that. And then the other thing communities do that they can't do is like create like a separate registration just for their, and some have asked that question, can I create a license plate for my city residents or for people to use our roads, like a sticker or something, and that's not permitted by statute. So not that you were looking to do that, but so I had that out. So like commonly what they do is they require driver's license, I see, they put hours on operation. One other thing is their open intox are not a violation by state law. So often the community will put a no open intox in UTVs or ATVs. Because the state law does not address that. So that's one thing you may want to consider. And then just being sure you adopt all of our code. So when you get loud ATV complaints or modified machines, we can address that, because we actually do take a pretty hard line. I know in our state, we don't address like loud motorcycles. In our state, or the home of Harley, we don't really do that, but we do. The state does address excessively loud ATVs, snowmobiles, UTVs. There's a testing procedure we've been trained on. So if you get complaints, you guys feel free to forward it off to us. And it's an actual standard that holds up to scrutiny, and in case somebody challenges it.
My limited understanding of that is if it's factory, it's okay.
It
If
should
you
be.
modify it and it's loud, that's not okay.
That's how ideally it should work. They're not allowed to manufacture a machine that exceeds that 96 decibels. But to be honest, there's so many weird machines coming on the market now. Like, I mean, Lowe's is selling them, Farm and Fleet, like weird Chinese, like made overseas kind of things. They're not Polaris. They're this weird name brand, which I don't know how you get equipment or parts for them if they go down. But those are the ones I'm always nervous about, because they're not really necessarily as stringent or as bound by the consumer safety product folks, because they're just coming in on a boat, and hopefully they conform to that 96 decibels.
Access, again, I have another access question. We could make all the roads in the city open. But my understanding, and I can, I've been wrong before, so I know what it looks like. Access is kind of limited on state roads, that you can't really ride on state roads like Highway 26, Highway 12, that situation, except inside city limits where it's an improved at a low enough speed limit. Is that correct?
Yeah, you got it. Exactly. It's any roads that's even though you don't maintain them, whether they're county roads or state roads, if they come through your community and it's 35 or less, you have the authority or discretion to open that road, even though it doesn't belong to you. It's not maintained by you.
Does the county also have that discretion?
Yes.
I'm asking based on, because I know some of the ATV groups and they've spoken to me, and there'd be things where probably an intersection you're not familiar with, but where Highway 106 West goes under the bypass, where they'd want to be able to access 1,000 feet,
Mhm.
so that they could access public roads that would take them other places or down along the lake.
Yeah.
That it's doable, but it's not an automatic, because they're probably already at a speed limit that's over.
Yeah. I could just tell you that communities that have tried to get DOT to lower to conform to that have not been successful. Lower the speed limit for purpose of lowering the speed limit is not to accommodate the ATV users. So that hasn't worked, but there's been some discussions to maybe raise that limit to 45 in the last legislative council that met. So there could be that, but if it's at 55, I don't think that's what it is at. That would be a tough. DOT is not going to approve it. Yeah.
Right there where you cross underneath it, within 1,000 feet, there's
Yeah.
a road to the left takes you down by Lake Koshkonong, where there's restaurants and bars and things that you
Yep.
they would be wishing to access.
I mean, you could talk to the DOT liaison. I know they haven't been successful in that, but I mean, it makes sense. It's just,
Well, again, I see a problem where Fort, 9 out of 10 roads coming into Fort are a state highway.
right.
There's only gonna be 1 or 2 roads that get you outside the city.
Yeah, you might be jammed up there. Yeah. If you're gonna allow them in, yeah.
Jason, I appreciate this. And one question I had, and you may have briefly touched on this, and if I missed it, I apologize. What about if you drive a car or truck, you have to have insurance? Are there insurance requirements on ATVs, UTVs?
No, I know communities have required that.
Community could
liability.
require it.
Yeah. Well, once again, it goes back to that idea that it's supposed to be in strict conformity. It's just really challenging when every single community has different ordinances and they're seemingly connected. Like for example, as soon as they cross into your jurisdiction, all of a sudden you have a different set of laws from, it'd be like you guys had an ordinance where you can't drive a red car into our city, how would anybody know what the rules are when they cross the line? You could say, well, they should know that, but when you operate on the public roadway, there's a principle that we all kind of know what the standards are. We follow the street speed limit signs, we know what stop signs, everything's uniform, but now all of a sudden I cross from your city into the township, and now I need liability. I can't drive at 16, but you can drive at 12. If everyone followed the statute, which it says strict conformity, it would have been a lot nicer, but that's not what's happening. Everyone's kind of just doing their own thing, unfortunately. And we don't have a review authority. We have review authority with like boating ordinances and stuff, but we have not been granted that in the ATV world. So just consider that when you put a lot of ordinances in place that people are going to be crossing that line. And
Is crossing a state highway the identical thing as driving on it?
no, you can cross a state highway. Yeah, I mean, that scenario you described, you had to take a jog down it, right?
Yeah.
That 1,000 feet, right? Yeah, but you can cross it. Is that what you're asking?
Well, no, I'm asking, like, there's places where if you went 106 east, where one of the access roads that would be accessible to the city would be along Bark River, along the Rock River.
Mhm.
And it ultimately could cross over 106 to Curtis Mill. That would be legal?
Yes, crossing would be, yep. Yep, you can cross over roads as long as they're not interstates or more than, I think, I forget if it's 6 lanes of traffic or something, but nothing that would be an issue. You just, ideally what you would put is like an arrow. There's DOT, just like there's DOT standards for signage. There's ones for ATVs that maybe just put an arrow going straight right at that stop sign there. So people know you can't go right or left onto the highway, you have to go across. But yeah, you can cross directly across a state highway. You just can't operate along parallel to it. There's a lot to it.
So kind of back to the OWI stuff. If an officer wants to stop one for it, you can only write the ticket. They can't arrest them that night.
No, so there is what's called implied consent, which means just like on a road where if you drive a machine, you've agreed to have a test of your blood, breath, or urine, whichever the test is, if you are deemed to be impaired. So just like on a road, officer stops you, they smell intoxicant, they're going to run you through a battery of tests, walk and turn, all that stuff. They're going to do the same tests, and you are obligated to get to a machine or draw blood, whatever your primary test is. But it's just the penalties are not the same as the vehicle. So there is no in the motor vehicle world, you get suspended of your driving privileges if you get arrested, or revoked if you refuse. There's none of that. It's just basically a ticket, but you go through all the other processes of it. It's just.
So when you get to your 4th or 5th one in Wisconsin, it's a felony, and you could face jail or prison. ATV at your 4th or 5th, you just get fined.
Yeah, it is actually a crime. The second one in 5 years is a crime, but it's just still, it's a fine. It's not a
But
forfeiture
that's all.
anymore. It's just a fine, but there's no jail time. There's no jail time component and it
But-
doesn't. Yeah,
So
so
it's just something that's gotta be taken up at state level if people want that changed.
yeah. I mean, people have started using the ATVs and UTVs because they have lost their driver's license because their roads are open. So they're sort of getting a loop around their suspension or revocation by using ATVs and UTVs, which communities have addressed with requiring a valid driver's license. But that's not a state law violation I can enforce. It would be your local officers.
That would go back to putting ordinance or limits on it that are not completely legal, but that nobody's gonna push it as long as it's done in the interest of safety.
I think you're probably right. I think anybody can challenge anything, but
If you're pushing your luck there, you're really not gonna challenge it in court more than likely.
yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to get an OWI on a ATV rather than a motor vehicle. So I wouldn't be challenging much, but yeah. I think there's gonna be a change down the road because it's being, especially with it popping up down here now. You've got so many communities reaching out to me for this stuff. And they all got copies of ordinances if you're interested. I'm sure you can look at the Walworth, the Jefferson County one, and I mean, is it Palmyra? Did they just open Palmyra?
Johnson,
open
correct.
Eagle, Johnson Creek, yeah. Oh yeah, I just did a training with them because they just opened theirs, yeah. So yeah, it's all over. You're surrounded, you're an island. Sorry, I
Thank you.
feel like I talk too much here, but.
Any more questions for?
Oh, that's been very informative. Thing. I
Great,
appreciate
yeah,
you
I'm
being
here
here.
to help in any way. The
Thank
only
you.
requirement, if you guys do, go ahead with one, is just, send, you have to send the state a copy, so it would just be to me. I file it and that's it. And you gotta sign. Thank you very much. Yeah. Sure.
So that's a discussion. You don't need a motion on that, correct?
No motion, but we do need some direction as to what this committee would like to see.
Is he up? Are we still on the ATV?
Yep,
use?
we're still on.
So when I was hired here as a police chief, I was asked, and my sole responsibility is to do things that make this community safe, improve the quality of life, and ensure security for our citizens and the people that come here. I don't believe that an ordinance like this complements any of those things that our police department is trying to achieve every day. So I am very against this ordinance. I worry about injury and death on our streets that if we pass an ordinance could happen, and I don't want that on my conscience. So I think there's a lot of things that we need to think about if we go down this road and if it is deemed to be an ordinance that the city wants to enact. I think there's a lot of different things that we just have to not lose sight of. They're not intended for the road. They weren't built with equipment that is meant for roadway travel. Their tires are not meant for roadway travel, as you've heard. There's no requirement for helmets and eye protection. The OWI laws are of very strong concern of mine. We already have a OWI issue in this community and in this county. It's something our officers do on a daily basis, is address drunk driving. The open intoxicants is a big concern of mine, where you can just actively drink in a vehicle or on an ATV as long as it's within that, it falls within ATV, UTV definition. You have exhaust issues where it could be loud, tire noise. So we're going to have increased complaints there most likely, because it's a different sound, even if it's not loud. Our community is not a sleepy northern community that complements ATV and UTV use. We don't have a trail system and tourism that's based around it. Our community does not have any businesses that complement ATV and UTVs. We don't have dealer or parts locations. We don't have that business. So we're not going to be adding a benefit to local businesses that are going to increase, and it is going to be a destination. You can do all kinds of research online, and I'm sure you can find stuff that's in favor of, and obviously there's lots out there that's not in favor of. When I go out and do research, I'm finding a lot of things that aren't positive. The ATV Safety Institute doesn't even support the option of driving them on the road. Their number 2 safety rule is never ride on paved roads except across when done safely and permitted by law. I just want to make sure I don't miss anything. This is going to have an impact on law enforcement and what we do each day. It's going to have an impact on fire and EMS. Because there's going to be things that they're going to have to deal with if we have accidents or injuries. It's going to impact DPW because they're going to have to deal with the signs and how we do it. Like everybody, there's going to be an effect there in a lot of different areas. Some of the things that I kind of listed out of concerns of mine are age restrictions. You know, if there is an ordinance, what are the age restrictions going to be? Right now, it's a 12-year-old child can ride one. So let's think about 12-year-old children. Some fifth graders and sixth graders are 12 years old. So are we going to allow them to drive? Are they going to be allowed to drive those to school? Are we going to have to worry about ATVs arriving at the elementary school because that's their transportation to school? We hope not, but that is a plausible thing that could occur. And do we want 12-year-olds driving motorized vehicles on our streets? The helmet and eye protection is a concern of mine. Valid driver's license is a concern of mine. Insurance is a very big concern of mine. They don't have to have insurance, yet if you drive a vehicle in Wisconsin, it is mandatory that you have insurance on your vehicle, but there is no requirement for ATV, UTV. And what is the impact that'll have if we have an uninsured driver crash and with injuries or property damage or vehicle damage? What's the impact on the insured driver? So that's all of us who are driving our vehicles. How do we enforce a lot of the different traffic violations, and what is the impact that I'll have on our municipal court? Exhaust noise, road rated wheels, OWI, open intox. There's a lot of different stuff. Safety features, they're all concerns of mine, and I'm kind of skimming quick because I know we have another meeting in a couple minutes. And then let's think about the other things that it impacts, or why do we want to make this decision, or what's the benefit? How does it make our streets safer? I don't have an answer for that. How does it help us meet our goals within the comprehensive plan, such as Chapter 7 transportation, enhance resident mobility and promote biking and walking through development of new multi-use trails and the promotion of compact mixed-use development patterns? How does it positively complement our comprehensive outdoor recreation plan? How will it positively impact tourism despite not having any trails, destinations, or commercial business that align with ATV use? How will this ordinance complement the goals of the Transportation and Traffic Committee? How will adding UTV and ATV traffic on our city streets improve our safe routes to school efforts? How will this ordinance complement the goals of the Chamber of Commerce and the Fort Atkinson tourism goals to brand Fort as a healthy community? What percentage of city residents have a UTV or ATV? Is this ordinance just an opportunity to positively impact a majority of our community, or just the preference of a small percentage of our community? Is this ordinance wanted by the majority or just by the a minority group? And then I just want to make sure, like, we as decision makers need to do things that are best for our community, not just things that align to our own personal preference. And that's where I really hang up, is we can't do things because we prefer it. It needs to be what is best for our community. And I hope we don't lose sight on that. And then what is the final impact on our budget? This will have a cost. And where do we come up with the money to address this when we're already dealing with not much surplus in what we're doing every day? So we have to do all kinds of training for our officers so they can enforce the laws and the rules appropriately according to the DNR code 23. We need to come up with signs. This is going to have an impact on municipal court. So like, how do we kind of put that all into perspective, and why is this then, with all that in mind, why is this what's good for our community? And that's kind of me being very blunt. So I'm open to any questions. I know we kind of are running out of time.
Are you aware of cities that are having problems with 12-year-olds driving, or are they mostly violating state law and writing an ordinance that says they can't?
I think you have a lot of things to overcome with an ordinance, and you have a lot of things you have to think about and consider. So if you do implement this as a city council, you do it correctly and appropriately without losing sight of all the different pitfalls that are before us.
In a week, you want direction. We have one more agenda item. We have city council in a little over 10 minutes. I appreciate all the feedback here. I appreciate the people that have been advocating for this. I think they've been trying to go about it in a very respectful, thoughtful way, which I appreciate. I think a lot of the points you brought up though were very valid. As a council member, I tend to err on the side of public safety, and that's always a concern for me. And in particular, the insurance issue and the enforcement issues would be a big concern for me. I was just up north this weekend, White Lake's July 4th parade. Half the parade was ATVs and UTVs, and they're proud of it. It makes sense up there. 'Cause it's a rural area. I observed riders exhibiting behavior that I would not want to see in this community. And there was no enforcement in that area. It's just too rural. So those would be things on my mind, and I would be very concerned with if we were to look at this further. Right now, from what we've heard and what we've heard about the state statutes being apparently so lax on this, I don't know that I would necessarily think that we're ready to move something forward right now.
And I would have a different opinion than you, Mason. I think this is vetted all the way around us. That's why we're an island. It's been vetted by many municipalities, counties, townships. It's vetted. There's rules. I mean, it doesn't go from us to just happening. We're gonna have to draft an ordinance, and we're all gonna look at the ordinance and say, this is a good ordinance, or we need to change the ordinance and add or subtract from it till we're comfortable we've got a fair, safe, and quality ordinance if we're going to approve it. But it seems to be a popular enough thing by how this is expanding across the southern states, or southern counties, I should say, to not address it with, can we draft an ordinance that would function? If we can't, so be it. We can. I think that the public would like it because they apparently have liked it in enough counties and places and across the state as it's growing.
I'll just throw in my 2 cents. Doing a lot of the research, I've had a lot of people reach out to me as well. If you look at most of the surrounding municipalities, all the ordinances are pretty much the same.
Mhm.
You know, Johnson Creek does address the open intoxicants. I talked to a couple police officers around the area. They've said, you know, a lot of the stuff is just minor traffic violations that they are encountering, registration. But, you know, I don't think we're gonna have, with the idea of putting the driver's license rule in, you can write in, most municipalities have wrote in at least a liability insurance. Most of these people are gonna have liability insurance, if not more, because these are $30,000, $40,000 machines. You know, it's not something I want to go out total and, well, now I'm out $30,000, $40,000.
And I'm also aware that the UTV clubs that have approached me have shown me a letter from the police chief of Jefferson, who was opposed to it and has done a 180 and is very much pleased with having that amendment in Jefferson. So it's not a stone wall we're running into.
That comment goes contrary to my conversation with Chief Richter at 1 o'clock today, which is just before he called you back.
Yep. He kind of told me he wasn't fully on either side of the aisle. He said it hasn't seen any major problems, is what he told me. You know, it's like driving a vehicle. You're gonna have the problem child in town regardless. But
I'll acknowledge, I reached out to a colleague in a neighboring community that's allowed it for a while. He said so far they haven't had any problems. At the same time, the fact that everybody else is doing it, that's not necessarily the most convincing argument for me. Every community is different. What works in, like I referenced, White Lake, Wisconsin doesn't necessarily work here, and what works in Jefferson may not work here, or vice versa. So I guess I'm not convinced this is ready right now.
Okay, so as we're looking for direction for our city manager, are we gonna do this as a vote? Or are we gonna just? Because if we're gonna do it as a vote, I would make a motion that we attempt to create an ordinance that would function.
So it's not on the agenda for action, but if you know, if you can address some of the issues that are outlined in the memo, as far as direction goes, then, we can draft something and bring it back either to the full council or back to this committee for additional review. We can certainly draft something that is more general and then bring that back to this committee for further review.
Okay, I realize it's not on the agenda as a vote on item, but if I'm given direction, my direction is let's go in that direction. On an ordinance that allows it.
Yes. Yeah, I did talk to city attorney prior and he did say he has similar ordinances written. It's kind of just got to be gone over. To look through, we do have, I know I've talked to 3 of the local clubs and they have been willing to help chip in money towards signage efforts. Whether that be just buying the signs or buying and helping fund the Public Works Department installing them. So it's not a full-fledged out of our budget paying for it.
Yeah, we don't have any funds allocated for this in the budget.
We need to move this along. We still have one agenda item to discuss. Item number 7, discussions relating to definition of animal ownership within the context of fostering pets.
Okay, so we have received some requests from local rescue groups to change the definition of animal ownership that would allow for fostering of pets, specifically dogs, but we would have to make that clear from an ordinance. So you have outlined in the memo, you have some information relating to what, again, we're looking for direction from this committee in order to draft something that would then be reviewed by either this committee or the city council. And there are with direction from this body, I will reach out to some of those rescue groups that were included in the materials in your packet and determine, what would be the least disruptive way to permit, I guess, additional fostering. Maybe something that's more in line with state statutes relating to the definition of harboring and keeping versus ownership. This is what I would work with Chief Bump and the police department and Clerk Ebert as well from the licensing standpoint to work on something if that is acceptable to this committee.
I've had residents reach out on this before that they would, like to be able to temporarily take care of an extra animal, that kind of thing. I think it's reasonable that we explore safe ways to allow that.
I've noticed a definite trend to rescue animals. Didn't used to hear of them. Now everybody I talk to, 9 out of 10 of them that have a new dog got a rescue.
Mhm.
So taking care of animals and being friendly that way and compassionate. Yeah, I think we should move in that direction to discuss it further.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Item 8, adjournment.
Move to adjourn.
Second,
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
I.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned.